Renew my courage for the peace restored. My cup is empty, refill it, dear Lord. Replace all doubts and fears with faith so bold. Renew my love, refill my faith, oh, restore my soul. Renew my love, refill my faith, oh, restore my soul.
I would imagine most everybody in this room this morning knows who this gentleman is. And if you don't recognize the face, which I don't necessarily blame you, I am awful with faces, you probably recognize the name of Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett is the self-styled Oracle of Omaha. And if you don't know who the Oracle of Omaha is, he is the 84-year-old, several billion-dollar owner of Berkshire Hathaway, who started in 1970 as a simple investment firm. He started it with a few kind of principles in mind, a few smaller clients, and has since exploded since then. Berkshire Hathaway's, to this point, is now worth tens of billions of dollars. The chair, or the business as an entity, and I'm sure Zach can speak to this more than I can, the entity as a whole has several different investments with a lot of different brand names that you would know, things like Coca-Cola, those types of things. He is regarded universally, at least by everybody that I've read, as one of the most successful investors of history. And when you think about somebody like this, especially somebody who has a net worth of right around $73 billion, making him the fourth wealthiest person literally in the entire world, you would think that Warren Buffett would have this kind of shark mentality. If you've ever seen Shark Tank, you think he probably has one of those type of mentalities where he just goes into a room and he just negotiates and plays hardball with you, where he's talking about this, he's talking about this, and it's this cutthroat game where he tries to take everything that he can. When in reality, Warren Buffett really wasn't worth, and I say this very tongue-in-cheek, he wasn't even worth $1 billion until he was about 45 years old. I'm saying that very tongue-in-cheek. But Warren Buffett operates by some very similar, some very simple type of investing principles. You would think this guy just has some of the most outlandish luck, or some of the most outlandish and the most amazing happenstances that would ever happen to him. But he has some very simple investment strategies. For instance, one of the things that he goes by is this statement: if the business does well, the stock eventually follows. Now that seems like very common sense. Obviously you invest in Coca-Cola, I think around 1915, you put $100 into it. At this stage of the game, you're worth about $300 million. So, the company does well, the stock will eventually follow. He also very similar said this. He said it's far better to buy a wonderful company at a fair price than a fair company at a wonderful price. That sounds also very simple, but it's one of those maxims that he's lived by. One of the things that I've loved, and I think this applies not just to the idea of investing, not just the idea of financial sphere, but also this phrase. He says, our favorite holding period is forever. Warren Buffett does not believe in buying any type of stock or buying any investment portfolio that you cannot see yourself owning 10 years down the road. As a matter of fact, he says one of the most important business advices he's ever gotten was when somebody told him when he was about 25 or 30, they handed him a punch card with 20 different holes. And they said, when you invest in 20 different companies, that's it for the rest of your life. And so make sure that those 20 companies that you invest in, he's obviously speaking very metaphorical, but he says those 20 businesses that you invest in, you better be willing to hold for a long period of time. And Warren Buffett is renowned for statements like this, where he talks about if you're not comfortable owning it for at least 10 years, you shouldn't even own it for 10 minutes. And so Warren Buffett has amassed $87 billion simply based off of a principle known as value-based investing, where you base your investments not on these day trader type things where the stock goes up, the stock goes down literally within minutes, but long-term investing based on a company's profile for a long period of time. And because of those principles, Warren Buffett and Berkshire Hathaway has made a lot of people very, very wealthy. I think whenever you join a local church, ladies and gentlemen, the same exact principle holds fast. You may not have known it, but when you join a local congregation, whenever you attach yourself to them, you are making a claim to that congregation the same way that you do when you buy stocks with this value-based investing. You are making a claim that you believe in this congregation, that you want to be attached to this congregation, that you believe that this congregation is doing great things, you believe that they stand for the truth, and you want to be a part of it. And so whether you know it or not, if you came after we had elders, or whether you came when we didn't have elders, when you sat in that little room, maybe you with your wife, maybe you with whoever, when you sat in that little room and talked to those people, you made a commitment at that point in time, just like I did 8 years ago, to commit yourself to the work. And what you're essentially saying with that meeting by wanting to place membership is, I believe in this congregation. I believe in the direction. I believe in the leadership. And I believe that I can contribute to that. You may not have realized that when you placed membership, but that's in essence what's happening. If you would look at Acts 9 chapter, flip over there if you would. We're going to be looking in the scriptures quite a bit this morning. We didn't a whole lot last week, and that was my fault. We need to spend more time in the scriptures than we did last week and some other times, so we're going to remedy that a little bit this morning. Acts chapter 9, starting in verse 26. This is a story that comes on the back end of something that's very familiar to us. This is Saul's conversion to Christianity, where he eventually be known as Paul. But after Saul is converted, you can see that verse 19 down through verse 23. When it says there in Acts chapter 9, starting in verse 26, that's where he departs and goes to another town, another city, and he joins himself to a church. Look at Acts chapter 9, starting in verse 26. It says, when he came to Jerusalem, he was trying to associate with the disciples, but they were all afraid of him, not believing that he was a disciple, and for good reason. This was the man, if you remember earlier in the book of Acts, chapters 8, chapter 9, that would literally drag converts off to prison, drag them off to the execution chamber, literally to be murdered for their faith. And so the disciples in Jerusalem, when Jesus and Paul came to them, they were right to be a little wary. We don't know what this guy's all about. Maybe he's a spy, wouldn't have been unheard of. Verse 27, Barnabas took hold of him and brought him to the apostles and described to them how he had seen the Lord on the road to Damascus, that he had talked to him, and how at Damascus he had spoken out boldly in the name of Jesus. He was with them, moving about freely in Jerusalem, speaking out boldly in the name of the Lord. Now listen to this, verse 29. He was talking and arguing with the Hellenistic Jews, but they were attempting to put him to death. But when the brethren learned of it, they brought him down to Caesarea and sent him away to Tarsus. What you see Paul doing in this sense, in Acts 9 chapter, is once he attaches himself to a congregation, fervently engaging in the work in that congregation. He shows up in Jerusalem, having just completed probably a year or so at Damascus, where he's a Christian. He joins himself with the people of Jerusalem, and then right away he engages in evangelism. He's standing up to the Hellenistic Jews. He's standing up to everybody that dares contradict Jesus as the Christ, and he speaks adamantly about God. And because of his interactions, because of his activities in Acts 9 chapter, he strengthens everybody up. If you remember in Acts the 18th chapter, you see a very similar mindset about somebody named Apollos. Apollos, who was taken aside by Priscilla and Aquila, who only knew the baptism of John, and they teach him the way of God more accurately. And one of the noteworthy statements in Acts the 18th chapter talking about Apollos is that he preached the word of God very powerfully. And when he did, as you can see there in Acts chapter 18, verse 27, he greatly helped those who had believed through grace. When Apollos shows up and he starts speaking in Corinth, and he starts speaking in all these different places, and he's advocating powerfully for Jesus as the Christ. And that's a trait that I believe he had, that not everybody has. I certainly don't have that. The ability where you can just forcefully denounce everybody, no matter what it is. Apollos was a part of this. But his actions helped encourage those people. Why? Because after a while, people begin to see people like Apollos, people who see people like Paul, and think to themselves, they're out there speaking boldly in the name of Christ. They're putting themselves out there, taking a stand for the gospel. I can do that same thing too. When you attach yourself to a local congregation, what you are doing is adamantly testifying that you want to help the interests of that congregation. And as I look out here this morning, I see 78 people that are here this morning that want to further the work of the church here in Greenville. If you've attached yourself to this, if I've attached myself to this congregation, it is our responsibility to further perpetuate the work, encourage the work that's going on. I would testify, though, that a lot of people, including myself, are not always as aware as we should be of what our contribution is in a local congregation. I know from personal experience, and I don't mean to just keep putting myself at the forefront, but I think it's easy to talk to myself first before I talk to everybody else. I know that it's very easy to walk into a congregation, attach yourself to that congregation, and just kind of go on autopilot. When I was 18 years old, I interned with my brother who worked in downtown Dallas one summer. And I attended at a congregation that was in that area, and I was there for Sunday morning, Sunday night for probably 8 weeks. And I'll never forget, I sat in the exact same pew, the people around me sat in the exact same pews, and after 8 weeks I got up on Sunday night to leave. I would never see these people again. And the person that I had seen for 8 weeks across the aisle walked over to me and introduced himself finally. Now my argument is not to say that that person should have introduced himself 8 weeks ago, that's part of it. But the main thing is that I went to that congregation and was so invisible to the rest of the people that that person sitting right across the aisle from me for 8 weeks didn't even know I was there or didn't care that I was there. And I think sometimes when we go into a congregation, we tend to blend so easily that if we're there, it's great. If not, nobody really notices. And that's not the way it should be. The point of a local congregation is not to get 78 people that believe similar things into a room and then we all go back out to the real world. The point is on Sunday mornings and on Wednesday night when we gather together to worship God, to strengthen one another up into light, precious faith. Hebrews chapter 10, verses 24 and 25 is very explicit in this idea, but that's part of the whole realm of gathering together. To consider how you can stir one another up unto love and good works. It takes activity. It takes active engagement. It takes a willful interest in the work they do. Because it's far too easy to go on autopilot. And that's the last thing anybody as Christians should be doing. I think it's very easy for us sometimes to overestimate our contribution to a congregation. Before you ask, no, this is not directed at anybody, especially not Casey. It's not directed at anybody who I think is slacking. This is a general conversation, primarily speaking to myself, but also about everybody. And I think it's very easy, like I mentioned, to overestimate our own activities within a church. Think to yourself, well, yeah, I'm an active church member. And so what I wanted to do this morning was come up with a little test. And I want you to either agree or disagree with the four following statements that I'm going to make. It's going to be 4 points. I want you to think to yourself, please don't say it out loud, but I want you to agree or disagree in your own mind with the statements that I bring forth. First and foremost, I think about the brethren outside of services. What I mean when I say this is I don't sit there and think to myself about the brethren that are 400 miles away. I don't think to myself about the brethren that are in Asia. That's not who I'm talking about, although we should obviously be thinking about those people. When I say I think about the brethren outside of services, that means I sit there, maybe on a Tuesday afternoon, and think to myself about that person who I know is struggling. And maybe if I know that they're struggling, I pray for that person. It takes 20 seconds at the most, but they're on my mind, they're on my heart, they're in my prayers. And so when I'm talking about I think about that person outside of services, I want you to ask yourself, is the only time that you ever see, hear, or think about those people when you sit next to them in the pews? And if you disagree with that statement, be honest with yourself. If you would look at the book of John chapter 13. This comes in the middle of this upper room discourse that is so intimate. I love this upper room discourse because it speaks so much to the heart of Jesus and the apostles. And in John chapter 13, I want you to listen to what he has to say here, starting in verse 34. John chapter 13, starting in verse 34. As Jesus is sitting with his disciples in the upper room, his 12, his inner 12. I can't remember if Judas has gone by this point or not. I think he has. Somebody can correct me later on that if they want to. Look at John chapter 13, starting in verse 34. He looks at these apostles and he says, "A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another. Even as I have loved you, that you also love one another. By this all men will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." Verse 36. Simon Peter said to him, "Lord, where are you going?" Jesus answered, "Where I go, you cannot follow me now, but you will follow later." And Peter said to him, "Lord, why can I not follow you now? I will lay down my life for you." Jesus calls him on it there in verse 38, saying, "Will you lay down your life for me? Really, Peter? Truly, truly, I say to you, a rooster will not crow until you deny me 3 times. Peter is adamant in John the 13th chapter, verses 36 through 39. Adamant that he loves Jesus. Adamant that he will do whatever it takes, that he will even lay down his life for Jesus. And Jesus very soberly looks back at Peter there in verses 38 and 39 and says, before this evening is over, before the cock crows 3 times, the cock crows 3 times, I don't know who the cock is, before the cock crows 3 times, you will deny that you have even known me. And so you can see, especially when you look at verses 34 down to verse 36, that the basis of love is not purely emotionally based. And it's very easy for us whenever we get together at services to see somebody, I don't know, that's been baptized and rejoice with them and have it very, very emotional. But how does that love transcend years? How does that love transcend months even? It's very easy for us to look at somebody across the pew and think to themselves, that person shaved his beard and I am very emotionally happy about this. But how does that joy go any deeper? How does that joy go any further than just these outward expressions? Peter was known, and Peter, you can see all throughout the Gospels, was known for being impulsive, was known for being emotional, but at least at this point, John 13, his love really didn't go that deep. And that's why Jesus says in John chapter 13, verses 34 and 35, a new commandment, not one that you've heard before, where you just simply love one another, but I want you to love one another. I want you to sacrifice for one another. I want you to give of yourself to each other. I want you to love one another. Too often times a congregation of 78 or 780 people are simply just a conglomeration of all these different people who really don't care about each other at all. And we sit there in the pews and we think, well, that person looks great today. I can't believe that person missed services for whatever reason. And we think to ourselves, what's wrong with that guy? When in reality, the question that we should be asking is, what can I do to help? We should go to 1 Thessalonians chapter 2. 1 Thessalonians chapter 2. Paul had a lot of love for a lot of congregation. And it seems like no matter what congregation we're talking about, he had a lot of love for a whole lot of different congregations. But his love to the church at Thessalonica, to me, was a little bit unique. It seemed to go a little bit deeper. Listen to what Paul has to say here in 1 Thessalonians chapter 2. Starting in verse 1 of 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, he says, "For you yourselves know, brethren, that our coming to you was not in vain. But after we had already suffered and been mistreated at Philippi, as you know, we had the boldness of God to speak to you on the gospel of God amid much opposition. For our exhortation does not come from error, or from purity, or from what is seen, but just as we have been approved by God to be entrusted with the gospel, so we speak, not as pleasing men, but God who examines our hearts." That's the basis for what he's about to say. That we spoke the gospel to you. Look at verse 5. "We never came, though, with flattering speech, as you know, nor with a pretext for greed, God is witness. Nor did we seek glory from men, either from you or from others. Even as apostles of Christ, we might have asserted our authority." He's saying that we didn't come to you showing up trying to speak creative words that would just woo you. He said we didn't show up trying to throw our weight around, that we're apostles, and that everybody should just do what was said, even though they could have very easily done that, as he admits. But look at verse 7. He says, "We proved to be gentle among you as a nursing mother tenderly cares for her own children, having so fond an affection for you." Listen to this. "We were well pleased to impart to you not only the gospel of God, but also our own lives, because you had become very dear to us." You know what you hardly ever see Paul referencing anywhere throughout any of his epistles? You know what you hardly see him talking about at all? His family. You see him referencing a little bit of the Jews at large in Romans chapter 9, a little bit in Romans chapter 10, but you never see Paul, at least directly, saying to himself, "I miss my dad," or "I miss my brother." Why is that? And you can come up with all sorts of different reasons. In my opinion, it's because he understood intimately that the people that should have been the most important, that were the most important, were not the Jews, the people that he had grown up idolizing probably, but were fellow believers who had given them, maybe not related by blood, but had given them their own lives. And Paul says, "I love you for that." What we're talking about this morning is deeper than just a, "Hey, how you doing?" shake your hand on the way out the door. It's deeper than that kind of love. It's a, "I will go anywhere, I will do anything, I will sacrifice whatever it takes to make sure, number one, that you're taken care of physically, if that's what it takes. But also, number two, to make sure you're taken care of spiritually." There's an instance in the book of Mark, if you would look at that I think speaks volumes about Jesus. And that sounds very redundant, that the Gospels speak volumes about Jesus. But look at Mark chapter 10. Because it's easy as you look at the various miracles that Jesus does, it's easy to kind of float over the top of them and never really see the nuances. In Mark chapter 10, look what happens here starting in verse 46. I love, by the way, the fact that Mark names this person and calls him Bartimaeus. But in Mark chapter 10, starting in verse 46, it says, "Then they came to Jericho, and as he was leaving Jericho, talking about Jesus with his disciples, and a large crowd," and that's important to the story. He was leaving Jericho with his disciples and a large crowd. "Behold, a blind beggar named Bartimaeus, the son of Timaeus, was sitting by the road." Now, verse 47, he did what probably everybody did in his position. "When he heard that it was Jesus of the Nazarene, he began to cry and say, 'Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me.' And many were sternly telling him to be quiet." This is the crowd that was around him. Many were sternly telling him to be quiet. But he kept crying out all the more, "Son of David, have mercy on me." Look at verse 49. Jesus stopped. If you underline or highlight in your Bible, underline or highlight those two words, because that is pivotal understanding Jesus' persona and Jesus' understanding of his love for people. Because in the midst of this entire throng, this crowd of people that are trying to press towards him, that once they get close to him, one person, Bartimaeus, who is a blind beggar, cries out to Jesus, saying, "Have mercy on me." And Jesus, in the midst of this throng, stops dead in his tracks and asks that Bartimaeus be brought to him. I think it'd be nice if sometimes we began to stop for our brother. I know I've been too guilty of that too many times, where I'm enrolled in all these different things, of all these activities, all these different side projects, all this life that I have yet to live, and somebody calls and needs something, and I'm just way too busy. Can't handle it right now. That's not in my plan. And because it's not my plan, I just can't make time for it. And yet Jesus, who was possibly the busiest person ever in the history of the world for 3.5 years, with a large crowd, hears Bartimaeus crying out to him and stops dead in his tracks to heal him. And if we are Christians, and if we seek to emulate him in our lives, that should be something that we take to heart. So ask yourself the question now in light of all of this, do you really think about your brethren outside of services? Ask yourself this question as well. I've asked the elders what I can do. Now, there's a noticeable difference here. What you're not asking yourself is, what you're not saying to yourself is, I've asked the elders what I can do in the future, or I plan to ask the elders what I can do. This is you saying to yourself, I have, within the last month, within the last year, I have walked up to Paul and Shell, I have walked up to the 5 deacons, and I have asked them how I can serve this church. Have you done that? Have I done that? This is the question for me as well. But have I sought to actively be engaged in the work of the congregation, whether it's visiting somebody, whether it's taking care of some kind of physical need? Have I invested my life in making sure that this congregation runs smoothly? Ask yourself that question. It's very easy to say, as so many people would, well, I lead singing, I do sermons, I have prayers, I do all these different things. But are you actively trying to grow your faith? Are you actively seeking to help the work? Look, if you would, in Haggai, the first chapter. Haggai chapter 1. If you're like me, sometimes we need to dust off the minor prophets. But Haggai is right before Zechariah and right after Zephaniah, if that helps you at all. Z-H-Z. But Haggai is a 2-chapter book right in the middle of this minor prophet. It has a lot to say the post-exilic period after the remnant has returned back to Jerusalem. And Haggai is writing at the time of Nehemiah, he's writing at the time of Ezra, and he sees that there's flaws in the way that these people are approaching the work. The temple lies in ruins. The walls maybe have been completed. I can't remember at this point. But in Haggai chapter 1, starting verse 1, listen to what it says here. The 2nd year of Darius the king, the 1st day of the 6th month, the word of the Lord came by the prophet Haggai to Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, governor of Judah, and to Joshua, the son of Jehozadak, the high priest. These were the men in charge, if memory serves me right, of building the walls. It could have been of building the temple. I always get those two confused. And it says, verse 2, thus says the Lord of hosts, this people says the time has not come, even the time for the house of the Lord to be rebuilt. Now stop there. Haggai's complaint in Haggai chapter 1 and verse 2 is that the people are looking at the work and saying, now is not the time. Now is not the time for the work of the Lord to continue. We see that the walls are in disarray. We see that the temple was completely destroyed. But now is not the time, really. Because after all, once I take care of my own things first, once I build my own house, once I do all the things I need for my life, then I'll get to that. And Haggai continues here in verse 3 talking about, or actually responding back to that thought by saying, in verse 4, is it time for you yourselves to dwell in your paneled houses while this house lies desolate? Now therefore, thus says the Lord of hosts, consider your ways. Verse 6, you have sown much, but you harvest little. You eat, but there's not enough to be satisfied. You drink, but there's not enough to become drunk. You put on clothing, but none is warm. He who earns wages is put into a purse with holes. You know what he teaches there in Haggai chapter 1, especially there in verses 6 and 7? You will never, ever achieve the end of your own selfish pursuits. Because whatever we all do, we all engage in these types of carnal desires where we say, well, I just need to get this promotion. Or I just need to get out of school. Or I just need to do blank. When the reality of the situation is, and every one of us knows this, once you achieve that, there's another mountain to climb. And then once you're past that mountain, there's another mountain. And then there's another mountain. And there's another mountain. And so what he says here in Haggai chapter 1, especially in verses 6 and 7, is you will never be able to achieve the material or the physical prosperity or whatever it is that you want to be satisfied. And because of that, the work of the Lord will never be finished. Consider your ways, he says there in verse 6. Can you honestly say that now is not the right time for the wall to be rebuilt? One of the principles that I think is oftentimes overlooked when we look at especially the New Testament, you can see the Old Testament as well, but that being a Christian is not in addition to your life, it is a part of your life. Everything about who you are moves through the Christian lens. Everything about your salvation moves through your daily life. And so for me to say, well, I'll take care of the Christian duties after I take care of this, misses the whole point entirely. And yet still someone would say, well, I sit at the back, I'm new here, I've never gone here. By the way, that's not a slam on anybody that sits at the back and is new here. I'm just trying to pick random things on my brain. But somebody may say, well, I can't do this, I can't do this, I can't do this, I don't really know. So there's not really anything I can do. And I think when people say that, they fundamentally miss the silent impact that they have themselves. JFK was famous in 1960 for his grand inaugural day speech by saying, "Ask not what you can do for, what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country." Now that sounded very corny, but when you put that statement to the side, there's an underlying principle of serving others before yourself. And if there was any doubt about JFK's interest in that, 1962, when he's touring the new NASA, the Space Center, he's walking. It's one of my favorite stories about JFK. I don't have a whole lot, but it's one of my favorite stories about JFK, touring NASA, going through the space station, looking at things, and he spies out of the corner of his eye a janitor. And he sees this janitor that's pushing this mop, just nondescript, just kind of by himself. The president is walking by with his entourage. JFK sharply deviates and goes over to this janitor. And he looks at the janitor and he says, "What are you doing?" And it's a very simple, honest question. And the janitor looks at him, puts his mop down, looks the president square in the eye, and says, "I am helping to put a man on the moon." What a fantastic story to talk about the importance of every single one of us. Too often times we minimize our own life by saying, "Well, I can't do much," or "I can't do this," or "I can't do that." When in reality, we can do tons more. And we never need to look at our own contribution to any effort and think to ourselves, "Nobody cares about this." Because I guarantee you, if you stop showing up, people will notice. You will absolutely be missed. Ask yourself also this honest question. I've prayed for this church. So oftentimes it seems like I run across somebody, and it seems like not a week goes by that I don't talk to somebody, and the phrase comes up, "I've prayed, and that's all I can do." Or, "I've prayed, and I hope it works." You know what that sounds a lot like? Some kind of spell, or some kind of magic enchantment, where we walk up to something, we kind of sprinkle our prayer dust over it, and we say, "Well, I hope it grows something." When in reality, prayer is nothing if not effectual. It's nothing if not efficient in our growth for the church. Look at Luke, the 6th chapter. Luke chapter 6. Luke chapter 6. Jesus has to say here. And this is once again one of those times where Jesus' actions and his words kind of go hand in hand, but oftentimes fly under the radar. And in Luke, the 6th chapter, starting in verse 13, a story that's repeated, I think, in the other two synoptic gospels. I don't know if it's in John. But in Luke, the 6th chapter, Jesus is fulfilling a very important part of his ministry, and especially a part of his ministry that would come in handy later. And in Luke chapter 6, starting in verse 13, it says, "When day came, he called his disciples to him and chose 12 of them, whom he also named as apostles. Simon, whom he also named Peter," we talked about him before, "Andrew, his brother, James and John, Philip and Bartholomew, Matthew and Thomas, James the son of Alphaeus, Simon who was called Zealot, and also, yes, verse 16, Judas the son of James, and Judas Iscariot, who became a traitor." So you have this list of these apostles, and it seems very easy for us to just kind of fly over that. We've always heard the apostles, we know their names, we've probably seen them in Bible class several different times. But these are men that would literally go to all the corners of the world, oftentimes by themselves, risking death, a very gruesome death, to bring the gospel to these people. And so Jesus' selection of these people is not some willy-nilly you, and you, I just like you with the hair, or whatever. It's not what it's about. These are people that are going to fulfill a very important mission. But ask yourself, what was Jesus doing right before he selected them? Look at Luke, the 6th chapter, and verse 12. It says, right before he made the selection, that it was at this time that he went off to the mountain to pray. Not just pray, but he spent the whole night in prayer to God. That's all the way, if you talk about especially Hebrew language, that's all the way from 6, 7 o'clock in the evening, all the way to 6 o'clock in the morning. And even if you say, well, he didn't spend all night out there, maybe he only got out there at midnight, spent until 4. That's 4 hours. Even if you take it from that low, that he spent in devoted prayer to God about these men and about the work that they were performing. Let me ask you this question. When was the last time you or I gave focused prayer to the work that is going on at this congregation? And that's an honest question. I don't ask just you. I ask it myself as well. When was the last time, forget all night, when was the last time I spent 10 hours simply praying about the work at Hillside? And that's an honest question that all of us need to ask ourselves. Not because you get bonus points for praying 10 to 15 minutes. If you get 30 minutes, well, that's a gold star. That's not the point. The point is, how much is it on your heart? How much is it on my heart? How much are the people here on my heart? When was the last time that I sat down, deliberately turned my smartphone off, which is blasphemy in this day and age? But when was the last time I sat down, put my smartphone on Do Not Disturb, my iPhone? I won't try to genericize it with an Android, which is heathen. But I put my iPhone on Do Not Disturb, put it aside, and I prayed for 10 solid minutes about Paul and Shelley. And I prayed that these two men would guide our congregation in the way that it should go. That they would lead us spiritually. That they would help us to know spiritually what we need to be doing. That they would talk to somebody who I know is struggling because I need to go visit them too. Or those types of things. When was the last time I spent 10 minutes with my phone on Do Not Disturb and prayed about our 5 deacons who put an incredible amount of work into this congregation? These men need your prayers. These men need our prayers. When was the last time that we prayed for this congregation? I think the problem with a lot of our prayers, and maybe once again I'm just speaking to myself, but I think the problem with a lot of our prayers is we speak in broad generalities. You know what I'm talking about? When we get up to the podium or when we say our prayer before lunchtime or before we go to bed or whatever it is that you pray regularly, we oftentimes speak in broad generalities. And we say, Lord, be with the sick and afflicted, or Lord, be with this church, or Lord, be with all those people who have not yet known the gospel. Those are broad generalities. And I would argue, too, that we need to start dealing with specifics. I hope I'm not embarrassing Nick when I put him on the stage, or I'm not actually going to put you on the stage, but I hope I'm not embarrassing Nick. But those of you who have heard Nick pray, and this is not something that he's done recently, this is something he's done for the better part of 4 years, ever since he got here. Nick prays. Every time he leads us in public prayer, he prays in specifics. And anyone that's heard Nick pray knows that he doesn't just talk about the birds, and he doesn't just talk about the political climate and broad generalities. 2 weeks ago when he led the prayer, he said, let us pray for our rulers and the people of this government who make decisions on our everyday life, especially in regards to blank. And that was incredibly personal and incredibly specific. But I appreciate that prayer. Because it wasn't just speaking in generalities, because I know that was something that was on his heart. And if it was on his heart, it needed to be on mine as well. Look also with me, if you would, Daniel, the 2nd chapter. Daniel chapter 2. If you're like me, you've heard the story of Daniel 2 with the big idol and the interpretation, the dream. You've probably heard it 1,000 different times. One of my earliest Bible stories I can remember hearing in Bible class was Daniel chapter 2. I didn't have the pleasure of sitting at the feet of Joyce to listen to it, but I know Logan will. That was a soft jab to say I can't wait for Joyce to teach my kids. In Daniel chapter 2, though, if you're unfamiliar with the story, you have this huge idol that pops up in Nebuchadnezzar's dream. And nobody can interpret it, nobody can really remember it, nobody can say it. And so Nebuchadnezzar was on the verge of killing everybody. And Daniel, starting in verse 17, hears about the fact that this threat happens. And listen to what he says here in Daniel 2 and verse 17. So Daniel went to his house after he heard about this threat, and he informed his friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, that's Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He informed them about the matter. Verse 18, listen to this. So that they might request compassion from the God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that Daniel and his friends would not be destroyed with the rest of the wise men in Babylon. Let me tell you what Daniel did pray for that day. Daniel did not show up to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and say, you know guys, I heard about this threat that's happening, but we need to pray for it. So they got together in prayer and they said, please Lord, let your will be done and let whatever happens happen and let us be a part of it somehow. That's a great prayer. There's nothing wrong with that. But I bet you $1 billion, $79 billion, Warren Buffett's worth, just kind of linked the two. I bet you all the money in the world. It's not what they prayed for. I bet you when Daniel, Shadrach, and Meshach, and Abednego got together and they prayed about something, in this instance, they prayed, Lord, let us know the image, let us be able to interpret it, and let it be favorable to the king so that all of us do not die. That's a specific prayer for a specific time, at a specific moment, about a specific item of faith. Ladies and gentlemen, there are times in our lives, especially when it comes to the church, that we need to be specific. If you've been here for any length of time over the last 6 months, you know that our congregation has undergone incredible difficulties, health difficulties. People have gone in and out, people have had surgeries, multiple surgeries, and I'm not talking about if there could be any minor surgery. I'm not talking about minor surgeries. I'm talking about life-threatening, bring you to your knees surgeries. And there are times in all of our lives, in the last 6 months, where we need to be praying specifically for these things. The question I have to you is the same question for me. Are we doing those types of things? After you've answered these 3 questions, ask yourself very simply this question. I am constantly trying to grow in my service to God. 1 Corinthians 12, if you would, open up to that. 1 Corinthians chapter 12. are you trying to grow honestly in your service to God? I save this one for the last because this is the one that can be the most controversial, although it shouldn't really be. 1 Corinthians 12, where the specific application is very much about the idea of spiritual gifts and about gifts of the Holy Spirit, speaking in tongues, speaking or having miracles, those types of things. I don't want to diminish that fact at all. But the more broad application can be made in 1 Corinthians chapter 12 to all of our activities within a local congregation. And in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, listen to what he says here, verse 27. Now you are Christ's body and individually members of it. God has appointed in the church first apostles, second prophets, third teachers, and miracles, and gifts of healings, helps, administrations, various kinds of tongues. Verse 29, all are not apostles, are they? All are not prophets, are they? All are not teachers, are they? All are not workers of miracles, are they? All do not have gifts of healings, do they? All do not speak with tongues, do they? All do not interpret, do they? But earnestly desire the greater gifts, and I show you a still more excellent way. Paul, if you were listening to Paul dictate 1 Corinthians 12, the one mental image that you would get in your mind is passion. And as Paul speaks 1 Corinthians chapter 12, and he goes off about spiritual gifts, which he would for another 2 chapters, he hits this point in verse 27, and he says, all are not prophets, are they? No. All are not speakers of tongues, are they? No. And the point that he's making with that, especially in a modern day application, is not one person is everything to everybody. If you speak in tongues, especially this day, that's great. But you may not be able to do the other things. If you work miracles, that's great. But you may not be able to do the other things. And the important thing to take away from that is it takes a community of people to make up a church. And yet so many times what we do is we say exactly what he says right before this is, I'm not nigh. And because I'm not nigh, I can't really do anything. Or I'm a foot. Because I'm a foot, I can't really do anything. When in reality, the point that he makes in the verses immediately leading up to that is, what's the point if somebody says, well, I'm not nigh and I can't do that? Not everybody can see. And if everybody were nigh, where would the smelling be? Where would the hearing be? The most amazing thing to me as I read back in 1 Corinthians 12, especially the verses that lead up to that, is the person that is saying, I'm not a hand, is not someone, I don't mean to diminish any part of the body. I'm not talking about a pinky. He's not talking about your left thumbnail. The person that is saying to the hand, I'm not a hand, is the foot. And the foot is just as important as the hand. And so the importance is, oftentimes we say, well, I'm not an eye, I'm not an eye, so I can't do those types of things. But we undermine our own spiritual significance. And we undermine our own investment in the local congregation. And because of that, the church suffers. If you have 100 different people in one congregation, and 99 of them say, well, I just can't do it because of this, this, and this, the church falters. Not on the basis of one alone, but on the basis of the entire congregation not pulling together. Now let me make my point with this. My point when I talk about this is not that you need to go do the impossible. My point with this is not saying that you need to give more money. That's never been my point, of course, in this entire lesson. My point with this is not that you need to be all things to all people. But make no mistake about it, ladies and gentlemen, I am asking every single person, and I have no problem saying this because I know I first speak to myself, I am asking every single person in the building this morning to get uncomfortable with your service to God. Not necessarily a public sphere, although that's obviously a part of that for the men. If you've never led singing before, if you've never led a public prayer, get uncomfortable. Try it. Not maybe this week, but make it a goal. Because too often times what we do is we say, well, that's just not my thing. It's just not my thing. And too often times what we do is we apply that in the private sector. Well, I can't really evangelize because it's not my thing. I'm just uncomfortable reading the Bible in public. I'm uncomfortable praying in my cubicle in the middle of the workday. Get uncomfortable. And I speak to myself first when I talk about this. Because the basis of Christianity is not laid up with this lazy boy religion where we just kind of shoot out on autopilot. But it's laid up in people who are giving their blood, sweat, and tears to making this congregation succeed and doing the best that they possibly can in the service of God. Make no mistake about it, ladies and gentlemen, as you look back at the book of Exodus, there was nobody more unqualified to lead the Israelites out of Egypt than Moses. Moses was stubborn. He had an anger problem. He couldn't speak very well, for whatever that's worth. He is also very shy. He is also a coward because after he left Egypt, he never even thought about returning probably. And there was nobody more unqualified to lead the Israelites than Moses. And yet Moses succeeded. Why did Moses succeed? Because he had a heart for God. And at the end of the day, that's the only thing that matters. I look out amongst this congregation this morning, I see people that come from all different classes, all different ages, all different races, all these different backgrounds. And you alone know your own true limitations. But you alone also are the only one who knows your own strengths. And as I look out here this morning, I see 78 people that have hearts for God. And if you have a heart for God, then nothing else really matters. If you have a heart for His service and you have a heart for His work, nothing else matters in this world. Look up at this quote, or look up at this list again if you would, and ask yourself the questions. Am I really honest in my service to God? Am I fully invested in the work here? Because it may very well be, as you look up at this, you may think to yourself, well, I thought I was invested, I thought I was all in on Hillside. But I see right now that I haven't sacrificed what I need to. I haven't worked as I need to. I haven't given of my time and my prayers as I need to. And so if you're fully invested in the work here this morning, make it a goal to put these things into practice. These and about 1 billion other things. Let's start with these. Most of you know that my favorite president, and I apologize to no one, especially Casey, for this. Most of you know that my favorite president is Teddy Roosevelt. No shame in that. Teddy Roosevelt was a fantastic person. He was human. But in this quote to say that I think I've always kind of stuck with it. It's not long, listen to it. Teddy Roosevelt said, "It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who's actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming. But who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly. So that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat." That's a quote right there. Because what Teddy Roosevelt said is the same thing that we've been talking about this morning, which is that the only important thing is that you try. And at the end of time, if we look up at God and we say, I've done all these different things and I've put myself out there, I've failed in 99% of them. But I gave everything. And you know, God, that I gave everything. I don't know what else He could ask of us. Besides full, unthrottled obedience and devotion to God every single step of the way, putting ourselves second to Him who is ultimately first. And if your place tonight is among those timid and uncourageous souls who are sitting there thinking to himself, I would love to be a Christian, I just am not sure. Put that doubt to the side, close your eyes, and go full force into a life with God. And you will never, ever be sorry that you made a decision. If we can help in any way, won't you come as we stand?
Renew my courage, Lord, its needs restore. My cup is empty, refill it, dear Lord. Replace all doubt and fear with faith so bold. Renew my love, refill my faith, oh, restore my soul. Renew my love, refill my faith, oh, restore my soul.